Hello, I'm Riley, and this is the Diegetic Advancement Podcast. Hello, I've got a special episode this week. If you've been following the podcast, you'd know that I've been running a play-by-post war game, which came to an end recently. I was joined by Daniel from the Bandit's Keep, Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, Mirke from Mirke the Meek, and Bobby, who doesn't have a podcast, as players. And I was very appreciative of the effort they put in to participate and make it possible for me to do. I started the game partially as a driver to get myself to play more games, explore wargaming, and improve my skills at running games, and obviously to have fun. And so without the players, I couldn't have done any of that. At the end of the game, I asked for some feedback, and now have to be doubly appreciative because Merck had the great idea to put some time aside and get on a live call with Jason and myself to talk about the whole experience. So again, thank you to Merck and Jason. We had a really great chat, and that's what I'll be playing today. I have more to say about the war game, but there's plenty said in this conversation, and so I'll wait to share those until I get the next game up and running. It looks highly likely that Jason will run a Prohibition era style play by post soon, and so I'll let that happen. Enjoy being a player and use the time to develop the rules and the scenario further, and then I'll likely return to the topic on the podcast. We used Riverside to record the conversation, and overall, I was pretty impressed with it. We had a short conversation after this one about Riverside, which I think Merck might share later. The call will roll straight into my usual outro, so I will talk to you next week where we'll return to the Mordheim rules. There might be a midweek episode to respond to some call ins, and if you'd like to call in and share your thoughts, the details to do that will be in the show notes. But without further ado, let's start the call.
Yeah. Well, welcome once again. We got Jason and Riley on the line here. Yes, for your first attempt at a war game thing, and this is my first attempt playing a play-by-post war game, I thought it was great. Like I said in the last message I gave you, I thought the scope was very narrow and simple, which allowed all of us to join with our busy schedules and busy lives and be able to play. And I thought it went well. I know I came up on top, but I think I would have enjoyed it regardless. And I'm willing to play again. I don't know how you feel, Jason, but I was happy.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. I mean, as the person that came out on bottom, we've got both ends of the spectrum here. But
Yeah,
I, honestly, I did enjoy it. I would play again. I enjoyed, like you say, the limited scope, and to a limited degree, and we'll talk about it. The fog of war and lack of information. I actually liked the fact that we had as limited information as we did. I think the only problems I had were probably mine. I haven't gone back and looked exactly at what, and I know I'm going outside the scope of the opening comments, but I haven't gone back and read the initial briefing. There were a couple play wise, sorry, there were a couple rules wise things I missed early on that were probably my fault. Like I say, I haven't gone back and reread it, but that would have changed a little bit what I did. But I probably still would have come out on bottom because my luck with dice is pretty horrible.
yeah,
But it was fun. It was a lot of fun. I would definitely do it again, and I would recommend other people give it a shot.
yes. I too had issues with interpreting the rules, at least. So that my interpretation was that the 30 moves spaces that we were going to do and extracting Emberstone, I thought after that our pieces would stay where they were, and then the next turn we would move, and keep in this more dynamic battlefield. So that was my first misunderstanding. And then my second misunderstanding was I read that you can't go to the same place twice, but that was twice per turn. So my strategy would have changed as well. But like I said, first time around, you know, so I'm not faulting anybody with that.
Yeah, a few people got that wrong. So I think part of it was that I expressed a lot of the rules in the podcast episode, and then sent like a subset of those
Yeah.
in Discord to people. So there's probably a couple of things that were missed in that, not being terribly clear, but it's a fairly simple game, and for a first attempt, a couple of slip ups is okay, and I think yeah, it went kind of well. I had to interpret things anyway. Like if you only had, for the movement issue that you had, I just moved as far as you could, and then moved you back. And if I could pick up another node on the way, I'd go, yep, no worries. Same thing is if you got into combat and were forced off a point, now your plan has to change. So I kind of interpreted what your original plan was, and tried to still make the best plays, not just like we lost, I'll just stand around and do nothing.
Cool. What were your miscommunications, Jason? What were your breakdowns there?
Actually, the biggest one was the movement part. The same one that you had. It was I didn't realize our 30 moves had to include returning to our home base camp each time. Um, Maybe on the node thing that we couldn't hit it more than once. I think I also did that. I don't know. Riley probably remembers, but the I think those two were the big ones. Honestly, I think everything else was, and it sounds like we're beating Riley up here, but we're really not. It actually was a lot of fun, and those misinterpretations were he was very fast in responding to communication, saying, "Hey, no, do you want to change what you're doing, or this is this." So with the feedback back and forth, it wasn't like it was the end of the turn before I knew that there was a communication problem. So it really wasn't an issue with the rules because within sending in orders, within 12 hours, I had a response saying, "Hey, that doesn't work," and then we fixed it. So it wasn't a big deal. I think maybe we're making a bigger deal of that than it needs. It sounds like it's a bigger deal than it really was in the game, I think.
Yeah. I think that's like my only negative criticism at all, really. And yeah, like Jason was saying, quick to fix it, and I still came out on top, so it worked out. Um, well, Riley, you headed this up. Do you have your questions, or should I keep going?
I do have some questions. Um, they might be quick. So I thought maybe I'd just give a quick overview of the game, just for listeners who aren't sure what we're talking about. Basically, I had Mirke, Jason, Daniel, and a friend of mine, Bobby, create armies, which they could then split into 1 to 3 groups, and they'd get sent out into a city to collect Emberstone. And so it was a hex map, and the further into the city, the more valuable those resources were. And when they came into contact with each other, I would play out a miniatures skirmish game using the chainmail rules. Then I'd report back the turn, and we kind of repeat that for 3 turns. Obviously, Merc came out victorious, and Jason at the bottom, but it was kind of close. A lot of it did come down to dice rolls. Like the inner circle stuff was worth 3d6, but I had some people rolling like 4s and 5s on 3d6, and you're like, okay. And then other people rolled 12, and you're like, well, that's a pretty massive lead when you can
Yeah.
only harvest so many, and we're only doing such a short span of time.
That's interesting, considering all of our swingy 2d6, 3d6, and d20 conversations. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, well, the 3d6 is tends towards that average, but if you've got bad dice luck, you still roll low. So yeah, I do have a few questions. They're probably quick. I wanted to talk about the army creation. How do you go about picking your armies and kind of divvying them up in for each expedition. Mark, you want to start on that one?
Oh, sure. So it took me a while to come up with what I wanted because at the time I wasn't very familiar with chainmail, so I wasn't sure what was going to be the more optimal thing to do. And Daniel is like the chainmail guru here, so I was a little nervous. Um, I'm sounding a whole lot more competitive than I actually am, but I wanted to do well um, at the same time. So I know that having a higher level fighter, could really wreak havoc on some units. So I wanted a third level guy at least to be able to compete to some degree if getting into a battle with a higher level fighter. So I went with one of those, and I made I called it the Brute Squad, a group that had a lot of heavy or yeah, heavy foot and not so much light foot, but like a good unit to do a lot of damage if I needed to. And then I had like the two scout type units off of that with some archers and some light foot, some heavy, but more on the lighter end, just to have three teams, to divide and conquer in a way to get as much Emberstone as possible. So that's where I landed. I was at first going to just make three even units, but I then if I come across a really powerful unit, I'm not going to be able to do anything about it. So those were some of my rationales.
Jason?
Yeah. So initially, I broke into, I don't remember if it was 2 or 3 units, but I kind of broke the units up to try to cover more ground, and then at least one of them got trounced on the first turn. So after that, I just put everybody together and went as a group. The and I'm probably going outside the scope of the question here, but Merck's idea here, putting together a brute squad, and so this hex map, there were walls, and so to get to these different points, you had to mine. You had to go through these openings, these entrances, and there were just limited entrances. So it would have been easily to drop a brute squad or something and just sit them on one of those entrances to kind of guard you and to delay your opponents. And that probably, I don't know if anybody did that. What I'm really curious about when Riley's done his questions is kind of what everybody did in the different strategies that they did. But I didn't think of that at the time, just hearing Merck talk. But that would have been an interesting strategy to try to block access as you're mining the different areas.
If I could jump in real quick, Daniel tried to do that to me. I think on the first turn, he set an ambush at one of the gates, but what I was doing, I had all three of my armies traveling together to get to the inner ring before breaking up. So Daniel's little little ambush met my full force and didn't have a chance. So, and
Got
Riley,
it.
you can fill in details there if you want.
Yeah, there was a few cases, mainly with Daniel setting ambushes at the gates. He did set an ambush actually at your starting gate, Jason, which is where I realized there's sort of a potential problem with the having to return home, is that he had to leave that ambush position at turn movement 20 or 22 or something like that, well before you would return home, unless you had um, collected enough and returned home early. That ambush was never going to work, which was a bit of a shame. But he tried a couple of others even after his first attempt failed miserably. Um, most of the other tactics were traveling together or trying to meet back up at a point before returning home. A couple people put in sort of specific orders to how they wanted to kind of engage. If they just wanted to kind of um, have a quick skirmish and run away, or fully commit and kind of go in. But yeah, there wasn't a ton of Uh, anything terribly clever? Not to say that your movements weren't clever, but no one really tried to push the boundaries. No one said, "Oh, can I get a grappling hook and scale one of the walls?" you know, anything crazy. Um, but that does lead me into the next question though, which was, uh, how did you go about deciding the orders for your troops? And I guess we've already covered a little bit of that, but if there's anything else you wanted to add, um, Jason.
Not really. Once I definitely understood what was going on, I wanted to try to hit as many nodes as I could. But at the same time, after I got trounced and having the limited, or not limited, but putting all my units together, that limited me just having the one force moving around. So um, I, I don't know. It would have been interesting to see, and I'm curious. Maybe we can cover this at the end. Whether the returning to the home node, returning to your home camp each turn, was just part of the scenario you had picked up, or if the thought behind that, because it would have been interesting. Because we had to return anyway to drop off the mined gems, or you had X amount of carrying capacity, so it would have been dangerous to potentially mine things and not be able to carry them with you if you were overloaded. And just initially I thought we just had to be back by the end of the third turn. And I wonder if that wouldn't have been a more interesting scenario, just because that would have allowed those ambushes like what Daniel was trying to do,
Yeah,
and things
exactly.
like that.
I think
Yeah.
I chose that just so that each set of orders was sort of self-contained. But yeah, in retrospect, and certainly seeing it in play, it would be much more interesting to um, have a either shorter amount of movement per turn and not have to return home, and you're only returning home as as you kind of need to, either because you're injured, so you need to go rest, or you already got a full load of resources, so you head back, and that's definitely one of the big things that I would change going forward, because that would just lead to much more sort of dynamic um, encounters and orders for sure.
Well, also because potentially you could raid each other's homes at that point to get
Exactly, you
any
can
gem that was
scout
dropped
and
off.
find
Yeah.
what people are doing and kind of um, take advantage of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you had a carrying capacity, and if you lost a battle and you lost the Emberstone, the victor takes the Emberstone. There's some interesting choices to make there. How much do you want before you go back? Yeah, that would be interesting. But like I said at the beginning, maybe before recording, this was simple and the scope was simple and it was very enjoyable because of that. But these are some things to consider adding. That would make it a little more complex, but yeah, pretty enjoyable. So,
Cool.
uh,
Did you have anything to add on how you picked your orders, Mark?
yeah, so I know my goal was to get as much Emberstone. Your goal was to have some interesting fighting scenarios. I should have been thinking about that more a little bit, but I was just going into that inner circle because that's where the big nodes were. And I was also going for ones that only had one extraction left so that I could get those and no one else could. So if I got the big ones that were in the middle and nobody else could get them, I could extract the most Emberstone. So
So that's a confusion point I had then. Were the limited number of extractions per player or for everybody?
For everyone, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I misunderstood that too. So okay.
yeah. So once again, I guess I do have a competitive streak that I didn't realize because yeah, I was going for the throat there. I guess trying to get as much quickly before anyone else could and bring that back. So that kind of was my strategy. And I wanted the brute squad because I thought other people would be doing the same thing, and I wanted them to run into that squad in the middle. And I sent the two smaller ones into this second ring instead of the most inner ring.
It it would be way too much work, and I'm not asking for this to happen, but it would be kind of cool to see everybody's the final turn breakdown. Now that we're done, as far as what the moves, what that looked like. I mean, ideally, you'd have Riley would take a long time, do little animations of everybody moving each turn, right, and where they flash. I'm not asking for animation, but
Yeah.
but you know what I mean. It'd be interesting to see how that actually worked out. So in turn 3, Jason's forces go to an inner circle node, but it's now depleted, or there's only 1d6 left there, and to see how those decisions did play out in the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah. I do have it all recorded, but it's not in a
Yeah.
holding a map up. Not
Hmm.
terribly easy to read. An animation would be cool. There was only a couple of cases right on that last turn where people had hit the had tried to go to a node that had had been depleted. So that didn't come up too much. There were a lot of cases where armies kind of skirted past each other. Someone had just left the node as someone rocked up, or they just took different routes, and so kind of walked past each other. And that was kind of interesting to see. Like that turned to nothing happened, except for Jason's forces getting really bad dice luck and losing to Merck's much smaller force.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. No, no. I thought it was really interesting. It's interesting because I don't think as a player in this, to achieve the goal you're looking for, I was trying to think what different feedback you could have given us each turn. And obviously you don't want to give away too much information. And I think having that fog of war, not really knowing, I think that was good. I enjoyed that. I wouldn't have wanted that. I wonder if though a little more information. And I don't know what to tell you would have been good to give us in addition. Merck might have some ideas, but I almost wish I had a little more information as a player each turn. But at the same time, I definitely don't want too much because I don't want to ruin you, you know what I mean. I don't too much information would turn into would obviously it's a game and this is much more of a meta game that we're not down in the trenches, inhabiting the personalities of these individual commanders and but at the same time, it I don't know a little bit more, but I'm not sure what to ask for because I definitely don't want to ruin the fog of war part of it because that was a huge draw and enjoyable part of this, trying to guess what other people are doing.
Well, that was actually my next question. So you're good, Jason. Have you got any thoughts, Merck?
Maybe doubling the amount of turns and having the amount of movement points, and then not having to return to base. So, we could go somewhere and extract some nodes, and by that time, because it's a smaller move set, turn ends, and then you could say, Merc, after extracting that node, you see Jason's forces 1 hex up, and lay out that, and then we could make decisions. Okay, am I bigger than Jason? Should I go try to take him out and take his stuff, or should I be running from Jason right now? I think that it's still fog of war, but because we're so close, we could see that, or maybe, yeah, it's hard because
Yeah,
you
I was
don't
going to
want to
say.
go for
Yeah,
it.
I was going to say maybe more turns but less movement, so
Yeah,
you have a better chance to. What you don't want to do because we're effectively playing by mail, playing by post here. You can't. You don't want to do one. Every hex
yeah,
is a turn because it would take way too long. And at the same time, you don't want to do an interrupt. So you don't have an interrupt capability really. Although you could give that order if I see an enemy unit, a hex away, so you could have put that into your orders, I guess. Um, but yeah, I think more turns, maybe less movement though. But yeah, and not having to return. Um, and and the idea of putting out, and I guess we could have here put out flankers anyway. Uh, and I don't. Other people probably did that and took advantage of that. But if you put a unit out, so you're moving, and you have flankers out and hexes surrounding your main body, and they could give you warning. Hey, we see you. enemy force, but you would have to really detail your orders to make the most of that with the play by post setup.
And you don't want to, if you're the referee, it's like, what level of involvement do you want? Because we could get extremely detailed with the rules, which makes a lot of work for you. So finding that balance, that's an interesting question for sure.
Yeah, I think again it comes down to the not returning to base at the end of each turn, because the way that it was structured is that it was basically a clean slate each turn. So any information that you'd gathered was less useful. But I did feel like, I kind of wanted to give a little bit more, because otherwise, you're kind of just stabbing in the dark and just going, okay, I'm just going to go to the nearest node, and then the next nearest node, and then the next nearest node, and then come home. And that was kind of your only choice, really. I do like the ideas of some sort of scouting ability and getting some information that you can make choices about. I did have something else. I think potentially smaller, so larger hex sizes might have been interesting, and then it's more. It kind of changes the game up to potentially being about fighting over territory as well. But I think it does come down again to if you had a smaller turn in terms of movement and you were getting information as you were going, then you'd have more information to make choices for the next turn. But things like, I think even just submitting a map back to you and saying, hey, this was your movement, this is where the combat happened, and you had a sighting here of someone, and this is what you can see around you now. That actually wouldn't be too much effort on my end, because I've got the information. It's just about presenting it and actually being useful, being continuing on. So
Did you have any other? I've got a follow-up question when everybody else, or finishing question when everything's done.
the last one I had was okay. No, it was that one. There was kind of a lot happening in the background, invisible to you guys, because I'm executing all the orders and making everything happen. You're not really seeing how that's working, and getting more information would be good. The last ones I had were, do you have any questions for me, or any final thoughts and feedback? So happy to just open it up.
I've been talking a lot, Mark.
I guess one question I have was, did the goal of this was to allow you to have those more, zoomed in combats with chainmail? Do you feel like this accomplished that? Were the engagements that you had, were they interesting, exciting? Did you enjoy that part of it as well?
Yeah, so I did. It was a lot of fun. It was an excuse to get me to game, and I did. I kind of have trouble playing solo games. It's just trying to find the motivation, or even just ideas of what's going on, and kind of driving that. When you've got the input from actual players, that kind of lets you drive that. And there's kind of pressure. Oh, they've submitted their orders. I've got to actually play it out and get it back. So it was a great way to play more. And there were some interesting encounters. Another thing that I would change, I think, is kind of the structure of the scenario. A lot of it was based around the actual nodes of the Emberstone, but when you've just got forces of warriors that are both extracting the resource and meant to be defending or attacking, there's very little tactical decisions for me to make. It's, do I run or do I fight? And then you just fight. City terrain was pretty good. I just put up some random battle maps online and played it out. And there's some interesting terrain. I think a rule set that kind of allowed for more of that, like kind of a Mordheim where you're able to go into buildings, climb things, jump. That would make it more interesting. But really, just having a worker unit who was doing the extracting, or even even just machinery, that way you're actually defending something when those types of encounters happen. And even when you had met at like a crossroads, you're just both traveling. A lot of the time that happened very early, and so neither force had Emberstone, so you weren't going to fight over any resources that the other unit had. It was better just to walk away. And both parties was like, yeah, we don't. Why are we fighting? Let's just leave. But if you could have a couple of these worker forces, potentially you could set up some sort of flank and ambush and do some damage to the actual resource gathering part of the force. So, but having said that, it was a lot of fun to play out. So, yeah, kind of
So
echoing what you've said. Lots of things that I'd like to change and whatnot, but it was a simple setup and it was fun to play. So, yeah.
nice. So it sounds like troops, scouts, and workers. It's kind of your three-ish major units. I mean, troops will be divided down more, but
Yeah, actually, that's a couple other points. Movement speeds in the overworld, I had them all set to the same, so it didn't really matter if you were. A lot of people set these scout units up, and they were just light foot and whatever, but you didn't move any quicker than a really large force full of heavy armored foot. So I would change that. The map was also quite symmetrical, and so if two people left their home gates and tried to get to one gate, they're always going to arrive at the same time. So changing movement speeds up and maybe making the map a little bit more interesting. Um, Asymmetrical, putting some like a river in and some bridges and things like that, more places for dynamic encounters to happen. If there's a bridge there and that's the shortcut, then someone might want to set up a sort of a guard post there and protect people crossing it, right? So yeah, making it a little bit more dynamic in a couple of other ways as well.
It'd be interesting. It'd be more work on you, of course, or whoever's running it. But if you did say your fastest unit maybe move 10 hexes a turn or whatever, you could definitely do that fog of war at that point where your starting map is just 10 or maybe 12 hexes
Yeah.
from your home base, right? And then and then at the end of your movement, then you'll have whatever the visibility range is, another 3 hexes, whatever it is, right? And so that way, it won't be as obvious to the players because we could obviously. I mean, we were guessing a little bit, but you effectively knew where the other home bases were, or you had a pretty good guess at where the other home bases were for us.
Yep.
Where if we didn't have any clue where they were, that might have added some interesting. Or we know that if we go in the city, and you could have like you do that blank map with the walls maybe, but without the nodes, and then you're having to search to find them. That might add some interesting bits to it as well.
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, it's a matter of how much work you want to take on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So and I know we're running over time now. So did you have a follow up immediately in mind, or you can go back and just slowly refine this and revisit in a few months?
Yeah, I do want to revisit this scenario and kind of run something very similar. Whether I run it with chainmail or not, who knows? But still, kind of the same setup with kind of the improvements that we've talked about and anything else I can kind of think of that I might want to test or whatever. I'm thinking if I want to do something in between. But I don't really have too many good ideas. I could do something a little bit more like territorial based, so actual big forces and kind of just like playing Risk, or something. Dungeon crawl would be interesting to work out. Again, you don't want people to just move 30 feet in their turn, and that's your torchlight. That's all you can see. So that would be an interesting challenge to how can you do these long form dungeon crawls in a play by post that's happening like once a week or more than that per turn. But yeah, definitely gonna do something, and at some point come back to this. So
Excellent. Mirke, thank you for putting this talk together.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you guys for joining. Yeah, like I said, I really wanted to have a discussion. I could have just easily have submitted my thoughts to Riley, but actually, seeing your faces, chatting a little bit, yeah, I really appreciate that. So
yeah,
thank you guys.
much more enjoyable. Actually, the other thing I thought might be better to run it would actually be set up a Discord just for that, and so you could have a sort of discussion spot so that you're not just kind of by yourself playing, and then we could have a map that was somewhat live or whatnot, and I could put out sort of updates that everyone knows about. I think, do they do that in like Mordheim campaigns? They've got like a fake newsletter that comes out, and I know people do that at least.
Yeah, I've heard about that in the past. What Discord actually works pretty well for play by post, because what I've done in the past when I've run it is you can have a map that you update that everybody can see. Now, mind you, I did things like Boot Hill, they're robbing the bank, so it wasn't hidden movement or whatever. But you could have the discussion. You have the main discussion channel. You have a sidebar because there's got to be somewhere people put jokes.
Yep.
But the nice thing about Discord is you can also send private messages back and forth to the individual people. So if you have hidden information, you can have those sidebar conversations without anybody else knowing, and still have the main thing going forward. I would be tempted to do a dungeon crawl in Discord that way, because that the other advantage of that is now it's on the ref to keep it updated, so it would be more work on the ref if you did it quicker than once a week. But if you did it, say, twice a week, every 4 days maybe, it's not quite. It would go a little bit faster, but you would be able to, because like you say with dungeon crawl, you have to condense the moves down unless you just put the map out. Like you put down the dungeon map from TSR's dungeon board game and say, here's your map.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Which is a way you could definitely do it, but I don't know if that would be as satisfying as exploring
Yeah,
as you go.
lose the exploration part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
It's something to explore, definitely. I mean, we'll see if it looks like I'll have enough people to run my Prohibition era gangster game, so that'll be interesting to see. That obviously in that everybody will have their map of Chicago or Lake City or whatever whatever territory we use. But so that'll be interesting. That'll be an interesting thing to figure out. But that's probably a talk for another discussion, or a discussion for another time.
Yeah, yeah. It seems I'm curious about play by post, so maybe we could do another time.
yeah, I actually
what are the
run.
best ways?
Sorry, I run. Am I running 2 or 3? Sorry, 2. 2 play by post games as a GM, and I'm playing in another 2, and they're a blast. Yeah, like super low commitment, right? And you can still get a lot of gaming in and try different games out. I'm playing Traveller, Wolves Upon the Coast, Old School Essentials, and another Old School Essentials game. And yeah, you just kind of type up a message once a day, and that's it. Rather than traveling somewhere and playing for 3 or 4 hours.
Nice.
But yeah, thank you so much, Mark, for putting this together, and I really appreciate both of you and the other players putting in the effort to put the orders in and make this happen. Because as I said, yeah, it was a ton of fun. learned a lot, and looking forward to continuing. And yeah, looking forward to your game, Jason, if you get that up and running. Yeah, and as you said, Merc, this was fun. So
Very much so.
okay, I'll just jump in at the end here to say again, thank you to Merc and Jason. It was a really great chat, and I appreciate Merc setting it up and you both setting the time aside to do it. I had a lot of fun, both in the war game and in this chat. But that is it for today. Bye for now. I'd love to hear your feedback. You can reach me via Spotify, SpeakPipe, Discord, or email. Details, along with everything I've talked about today, are in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.